What a mess. Morning, river rats. This is what happens when you neglect to put your fishing stuff back where it belongs when you're done with it. So I'm going to clean up. And then we're going to talk about what makes the ultimate flathead fishing rod. So let's go. Yeah, I can definitely live with that. Anyway, let's talk about flathead fishing rods, because honestly, flathead catfish are pretty much the only thing I think about all day. Yeah, maybe that's a lie. I think about a few other things, but it's mostly flatheads. Truth of the matter is, there's so many good catfishing rods on the market, and you really can't go wrong. As long as it's big enough and beefy enough to handle the biggest fish you hope to catch, then you have the ultimate flathead fishing rod. But there's a few things I look for in a flathead fishing rod that makes it just more enjoyable to fish with. And this is all personal preference. I mean, you fish with the rods that you like. I highly recommend it because it makes fishing more fun. But these are the things that I look for in a flathead rod, the things that I prefer, and hopefully it gives you something else to look for, a consideration you wouldn't have thought of otherwise, that helps you find a fishing rod that's more enjoyable to fish with and does a better job of landing the fish that you hook on that fishing rod. So the first thing you need out of a flathead rod is some backbone, because you're going to be fishing in structure, and the whole point of the backbone is if this part down here is rigid and stiff and has little flex, then you have the ability to pull a fish away from structure. Because if this bottom portion of the rod, let's say you pull the fish 2 feet, but because of the flex bends and the actual tip of the rod only moves like, let's say, 6 inches or 4 inches. You pull 2 feet, you only actually move the fish 4 inches or 6 inches. So if you have backbone, if you have a stiffer lower half to 2/3 of the rod, what that allows is when you pull on that fish on a loaded rod, that fish is, if you pull 2 feet, that fish is going to move 1.5 feet, or maybe even close to 2 feet, depending on the backbone of the rod you got. Now, the second thing I look for, which is kind of a compromise, because you got to have a lot of backbone, you got to be able to lift and pull the fish away from cover, but you're using soft, natural live baits most of the time. So a forgiving tip section, one that has a little play on the end. Doesn't have to have a ton. Musky rods do absolutely work, but a rod that's geared more towards catfish with a little play on the end allows you to lob cast those soft live baits, cut baits, or even if you're going to wing them, it forgives a little bit and prevents you from throwing the bait off the hook. The other side of it is, once your bait's down there, a little play on the end over here gives something for the bait to struggle against. And if it's completely rigid on the top half of the rod, the rigidity at the end of the rod allows your live bait to tear off the hook more regularly. So if it's got a little cushion here and your bait has something to pull against that gives bait stay on the hook longer, that means you have baited hooks in the water longer, which bumps up your odds big time for your bait to be ready, waiting for when the big boy just happens to make its way right by your bait. I run line clickers at night, but during the day I don't, and this softer tip section also allows fish to grab the bait, suck it in, feeling minimal resistance, and it gradually loads up. Flatheads don't mind resistance. I mean, dudes run diddy pools with like giant chunks of PVC and 300-pound line, and a fish grabs it, and they don't mind just pulling against that thing. What they do mind, I feel like this is a secret a little bit. They mind erratic tension. If you pick up the rod and you pull tight and then you go loose and then go tight and loose again, what that erratic tension is what generally leads to the fish spitting the bait before you get a chance to set the hook. But if you pick up the rod gently and there's continual load on the end of the rod, or if you're running a circle hook and you just leave it in the holder and it continuously loads at the end of the rod, gradually, the fish rarely spits the bait. It happens. There's always exceptions, every single rule, but generally, not generally, rarely do you see a flathead spit the bait when there's gradual loading tension on the rod. The other part of the forgiving tip section is that it allows you more bite detection. If you have a stiff, rigid, musky rod you get a bite, the rod might only move a little bit, especially if you're fishing for them during the day. But with a softer, forgiving tip section, it's easier to see when you got a bite, and that leads to more fish caught. Another thing I look for in fishing rods is I want one with a longer foregrip, at least as long as my fist is wide, so I have something comfortable to grab onto above the reel. What that does is it allows you to fish a longer fishing rod but fight a fish as if it were shorter. You put more heat on it, more pressure on it, because you can reach further up on the blank. If you have to hold around the reel, there's nothing wrong with that. It works, but my elbow's bent funny. I lose some power on those super special, those gigantic fish. But with a longer foregrip, I can reach up higher. My arm is straight, a lot more powerful, and instead of pulling with my arm, I'm pulling with my whole body when I want to move that fish away from structure. I keep that in mind every time I'm looking for a fishing rod where I plan on fighting or hooking up on something big, or hope to hook up on something big. Really puts the advantages in your favor once that fish is hooked. I mean, it's science. Another thing I always consider when I'm looking for flathead fishing rods is length and power. From a boat or kayak, I'm not a fan of short rods. 7 to 8 footer is about perfect to me out of a boat or out of a kayak, because that extra length helps you keep the fish off the edge of the boat. It's less likely to cut you off on the gunnels, run your line along a rivet on the bottom of your john boat, or across, maybe you hit a rock in your all-well john boat and you have a little spur sticking out that you don't even know about, and that fish runs you across the bottom of the boat and cuts you off on that little aluminum spur sticking out the bottom. It also gives you more control over the fish, not from a power standpoint, but from a guiding standpoint. Longer fishing rod lets me steer him around a lot more effectively than a shorter rod. It also gives me more line control. With a longer rod, I can have more line out of the water, and I can position baits more effectively in current. So even out of a boat, even out of a kayak, I'm not a fan of those 5 to 6 foot rods. I like those longer rods for those reasons. From the bank, I like 8 to 10 foot rods, and it all comes down to line control. Power is not as big of a deal. To have that shorter lever arm from the bank, to me, line control is much more important, because yeah, you don't have as much power once you hook the fish, but if you hook more fish because you have better line control and can better and more efficiently position your baits where they're going to get hit, then to me, I'll take my chances once that 50-60 pounder hits, and just trust that I have, the fish fighting ability to get them to the bank, I hope. For power ratings, medium heavy to heavy, you can't really make a blanket statement on what power rating to look for. It really helps to put the rods in your hands, or at least watch videos to see somebody put a bend in them and see how the action plays out and what they're able to do. Because medium heavy in one rod blank is not medium heavy in another rod blank. And there's no universal measurement system for that. So it's just company by company basis. Like a heavy action for one rod manufacturer might be like a medium heavy for another, or maybe even a medium. So I mean, it's really best to put the rods in your hands to make an accurate judgment of which one you want to get. And if you can't do that, hey, watch some fishing videos, rod review videos, and that'll give you an idea where you want to go. The last thing I look for in a flathead rod or big catfish rod in general, and I mean all of this can be applied to big blue cats too, is a rod that's going to cast some weight. Because I mean, standard flathead bait, between the sinker and your bait, you're looking at least a pound, maybe less, but I often have between the sinker and the bait 2 to 3 pounds that I'm throwing on this rod right here. And that's important, because there's times where big baits are the way to go, and it's just cool to throw like a 2-pound live bait out and then have it get smoked by something, because it gets your adrenaline rolling. So I need a rod that can throw those big baits. Definitely a consideration I look for. And you have the backbone and a moderately forgiving tip section. That's why I don't want the flimsy one, because lots of times I want to throw a jumbo bait, so I need a rod that can handle. With all that said, it's your call what fishing rod you want to use. There's a million of them out there, and they'll all get the job done. Some work better in this situation, some work better in this situation. This is a heavy power whisker seeker. It's 7.5 foot, and this is my favorite overall flathead rod, because it meets all those requirements that I just said. But the body of water you fish is not the body of water I fish. Well, it could be, or maybe it's very similar, but maybe it's not. Like, different rivers have different attributes, different reservoirs have different attributes. Some people got to cast 150 yards to get to the fish. Some people have to drop their bait straight down. Some people are fishing flats with minimal cover on it, and having gigantic beefy gear isn't that big of a deal to them. Some people have to yank fish out of concrete rebar, rocky areas, or super heavy timber, and you got to put the boots to him and drag him out by his nose. And you know, it's just, what is your situation? What rod's going to work the best for you? Because at the end of the day, the one you like the best is the best rod for you. And if that isn't true, I don't know what else is. I hope this gives you some ideas on things to look for when it comes to flathead gear, things to keep in mind when you're trying to find the perfect flathead rod for you. And if you have any questions, put them in the comments section, because I like talking fishing. Well, actually, I don't like talking about fishing. I love talking about fishing. So yeah, if you enjoyed the video, if you thought it was helpful, hit the like button. If you want to see more catfishing stuff and all kinds of other fishing stuff, hit the subscribe button. I'd really appreciate it. Hope you catch giant.